Rome consumed up to 1,000,000 cubic meters of water per day, 400 Olympic-sized swimming pools, every single day. The water flowed into homes, bathhouses, fountains, and sewers ceaselessly, year-round, for a city with over 1,000,000 inhabitants. And here's the kicker. They had none of the technology we possess today. No electric pumps, no plastic pipes, no laser levels, no Caterpillar excavators, no Liebherr concrete mixers, not even a calculator. They had wooden frames with water channels, plumb bobs on ropes, homemade concrete from volcanic ash, and the minds that conceived it all. They built a water supply system that Europe failed to replicate for 18 centuries. We will now explore exactly how the Romans achieved this, from the first step to the last, in detail, for those unfamiliar with construction or physics. We'll cover how they found water, calculated routes, built channels, tunnels, and bridges as tall as 16-story buildings, how they maintained and repaired everything, and why one of their aqueducts still supplies water today to a fountain you might have walked past. Let's start with the problem. Rome sits on the Tiber River. The river is nearby, so there's plenty of water. Why build anything else, you might ask? But the Tiber wasn't a mountain stream. It was a river into which everything flowed. Slaughterhouse waste, human sewage, remember our discussion about insulae without toilets, and discharge from dying workshops. Roman doctors were well aware of the link between dirty water and disease. They didn't know the word bacteria, but they observed, drink from the Tiber and you get sick. Drink from a mountain spring and you don't. By the 4th century BCE, the city had outgrown all its local wells. Plus the bathhouses. Romans were obsessed with baths. By the 1st century CE, Rome had almost 1,000 of them, each consuming water on an industrial scale. A system was needed. And it was built by a blind man, Appius Claudius Caecus, a censor, a politician. Blind. Caecus literally means blind. In 312 BCE, this man did two things that changed Rome forever. He built the first paved road, the Appian Way, which we discussed yesterday, and he launched the first aqueduct, Aqua Appia. 16 kilometers of channel, almost entirely underground. Why underground? There was a war with the Samnites. An open channel would be a target. The enemy could cut it off in an hour, leaving 1,000,000 people without water. An underground channel was invisible. Appius understood that water was a strategic resource, but he did the most important thing. He proved it worked. That you could bring water from 16 kilometers away to the people without pumps, solely by gravity. After him, Rome would build 10 more aqueducts over the next 500 years, but the principle would remain the same. Let's see exactly how. Step 1. Finding water. Not just any water. A clean source was needed, a spring or mountain stream. River water was unsuitable, murky, sandy, full of parasites. Engineers, along with local residents, searched for springs, tasted the water, and observed whether the source dried up in the summer. But the crucial condition was that the source had to be higher than the city. This was critically important, and here's why. The entire system relied on gravity. Water only flows downhill. If the source was lower than the city, water wouldn't reach it. Period. No exceptions. So, the Romans ventured tens of kilometers from the city, into the mountains and foothills, to find water that would be higher than the destination. Once found, they moved to step 2. Step 2. Calculating the route. This is where the mind-boggling mathematics begins. Imagine, the source is in the mountains, the city is below. Between them, let's say, 50 kilometers. The source is, for example, 100 meters above sea level. The city is 83 meters. The difference is 17 meters. This means that over 50 kilometers the water must descend by only 17 meters, uniformly, without sudden drops. This is the gradient. Every kilometer the channel drops by 1/3 of a meter. Imagine, you walk a kilometer, and over that entire kilometer, the ground beneath you is dropped by the height of a soda can. You wouldn't notice it, but the water would, and it would flow. Sounds simple? Try maintaining that over 50 kilometers, through mountains, through ravines, through forests, without GPS. Moreover, the gradient couldn't be arbitrary, too steep and the water would rush, hit the walls, and destroy the channel. Too shallow, and it would stagnate and grow algae. All of this had to be calculated in advance, before the first pickaxe strike. Roman engineers first walked the entire route, measured elevations, and created a terrain profile. Only then did they begin construction. The question is, what did they use to measure? They used 3 instruments, each for a specific task. The first was the groma. It looked like a wooden cross on a pole, with 4 plumb lines hanging from its ends. Its purpose? To lay out a straight line on the ground. You stand at point A, look through 2 plumb lines. They align, and see where to place the next marker. Like a sight, but for the ground, not a rifle. Without the groma, it would be impossible to lay a straight route. The channel would meander like a drunkard. The second was the dioptra. This was the ancestor of the modern theodolite, that yellow tripod you see on construction sites today. A tube with sights on a rotating platform. Its purpose? To measure the angle of inclination between 2 points. The engineer looked through the sight at point B, tilted the tube, and saw how much higher or lower point B was than point A. Without the dioptra, calculating the gradient would be impossible. You wouldn't know which point was higher or lower, or by how much. And the third was the chorobates, my favorite. Imagine a wooden frame 6 meters long, massive, carried by 2 people. On it, a long trough filled with water. Its purpose? To check if the surface was horizontal right at that spot. If the water in the trough was level, the surface was horizontal. If the water shifted to one side, the surface was sloped, and you knew which way. This was a spirit level, the very bubble level you can buy in any hardware store for a few dollars today. Only this one was the size of a garage. The engineer would place the chorobates on the already excavated channel bed, check if it was level, move 6 meters further, and place it again, step by step, kilometer by kilometer. Step 3. Building the channel itself. This was called the spicus. Imagine a rectangular trough, approximately 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters high. It was either carved into rock or constructed from brick and Roman concrete. The inside walls were coated with a special mortar called opus signinum, a mixture of lime and crushed ceramic. This mortar made the channel watertight. The top was covered with stone slabs to protect it from debris, leaves, and animals. 90% of the channel ran underground. A trench was dug, the trough built inside it, covered, and then filled with earth. If a mountain was in the way, a tunnel was dug. If it was a hill, they routed around it with a loop, just to maintain the gradient. The entire route was divided into sections of 4 to 5 kilometers, with each section built simultaneously by a separate crew, much like how modern subways are constructed. Step 4. Overcoming obstacles. And this is where things get truly insane. The channel creeps underground and suddenly, a valley, a ravine, a river. The land drops 30, 40, 50 meters. The channel cannot dive down and climb back up. Water will not flow uphill. It only flows downhill. This means the channel must be carried across the valley at the same elevation it was traveling. How? By building a support structure. A gigantic stone support. Pont du Gard, the best example on the planet. The city of Nimes in southern France needed water. The nearest suitable source was the springs near the town of Uzès. As the crow flies, it's 20 kilometers. But between them lay a mountain range. A tunnel through it would be 8 to 10 kilometers of solid rock. The Romans decided, we'll go around. They laid out a 50-kilometer loop, through valleys, hills, along rivers, 2.5 times longer than the direct path. But the gradient was controlled. That same gentle descent of 1/3 of a meter per kilometer that we already discussed. 50 kilometers of channel, and it all worked. Until the channel reached the Garden River. And so the channel reaches the Garden River. Before it, a valley. The river is below. The channel runs at an elevation of approximately 50 meters above the riverbed. It cannot descend, as the water wouldn't rise back up. The only option is to carry the channel across the valley at the same elevation. For this, the Romans built a bridge. 3 tiers of stone arches. The lowest tier has 6 arches, standing directly in the riverbed. The middle tier has 11 arches. The top tier has 35 smaller arches. The total height is 49 meters. At the very top, on this 3rd tier, lies the Spicus, the water channel. That same meter-wide trough. Water enters the bridge from one bank, crawls along the channel on the upper tier for 275 meters, and exits on the other side, having dropped 2.5 centimeters. The entire bridge, 49 meters of stone, 6,000 tons, exists solely to prevent this trough from falling into the valley, and it was assembled without mortar, not a gram. The stones, some weighing up to 6 tons, were cut so precisely that they held together by their own weight, built in 5 years, standing for 2,000 years. What if the valley is even deeper, or wider, so much so that a bridge would be insane, too high, too expensive, too long to build? Then the Romans used an inverted siphon. And here you might ask, why not use siphons everywhere and avoid building bridges altogether? I'll explain, because a siphon is a headache. First, how it works. Take a regular garden hose, fill it with water and bend it into a U-shape. Hold one end at waist level, the other end also at waist level. The middle of the hose sags down towards the ground. The water in the hose won't go anywhere. It stays at the same level at both ends. Now, lower one end slightly. Water will flow towards the lower side, without a pump, simply because water in a closed pipe always seeks a common level. If one side is higher, it creates pressure and pushes itself out the other side. This is the law of communicating vessels, and it works regardless of how deeply the middle of the hose sags. A Roman siphon was the same hose, but made of lead and the size of a valley. A pipe descends from one bank, goes along the bottom, and rises to the other bank. The water at the inlet is slightly higher than at the outlet. This difference is sufficient. The water pushes itself through the entire pipe and emerges on the other side. No pumps, just physics. But here's the problem. At the bottom of the valley, the pressure in the pipe is tremendous. Tens of meters of water column pushing down. Ordinary ceramic would burst, so they used lead, a soft metal from which hermetic pipes could be cast. Yes, lead is poisonous. The Romans knew this. Vitruvius explicitly wrote that lead was harmful and recommended ceramic for drinking water. But for siphons there was no other choice. And that's why a siphon was a last resort, not the primary method. Firstly, a closed pipe cannot be cleaned properly, unlike an open channel that a person can enter. Secondly, lead. Thirdly, if a pipe bursts at the bottom of a valley, repairs are far more complex than mending a crack in an open channel. A bridge is more expensive but more reliable. A siphon is cheaper but riskier. The Romans considered both options and chose based on the situation. Step 5. Distributing water within the city. The channel reached the city wall. What next? Just dump it into the street? No. The water entered a castellum, a distribution basin. Imagine a stone basin, circular, 5.5 meters in diameter, 1 meter deep. Water from the aqueduct flowed into it from above. And from this basin pipes branched out in different directions. In Nimes, there were 10, each leading to a different district of the city. Why was this necessary? Because one aqueduct delivered water to a single point. But the city was large. Water needed to be distributed throughout the districts, like blood through arteries. The castellum was the heart. The pipes were the arteries. A larger district got a thicker pipe, allowing more water. A smaller district, a thinner one. Simple and logical. But the Romans sized the diameters so precisely that water was evenly distributed throughout the city without any additional mechanisms. Only the geometry of the pipes. From the castellum, water went in 3 directions. First, public fountains. They ran 24 hours a day, water overflowing, and anyone could draw from them. Second, bathhouses. Third, wealthy private homes, connected for a fee. Excess water flushed the sewers and drains. Nothing was wasted, but building it was only half the battle. The true genius of the Romans lay in how they maintained it all. Because an aqueduct isn't a monument, it's a living system. It breaks, it clogs, it deteriorates, and if it's not repaired, it dies. Here's what the Romans battled every day. Problem 1. Limescale. Mountain water is hard, it contains dissolved calcium. As water flows through the channel, carbon dioxide evaporates and calcium settles on the walls. Over years, a layer several centimeters thick accumulates. The channel narrows. The flow weakens. If not cleaned, the channel clogs. The solution: work crews climbed inside the channel and scraped the walls by hand. Channels were therefore made large enough for a person to fit inside, and along underground sections, vertical shafts were built for ventilation and access for repairmen. Cleaning occurred every 2 to 3 years, never in summer, only in spring, autumn, or winter, when consumption was lower. This isn't speculation. Archaeologists have found traces of cleaning deposits in an aqueduct in France. Maintenance regulations, 2,000 years ago. Problem 2. Trees. Roots grew through the stone, pushed apart joints and broke channel walls. Frontinus, more on him in a moment, described this as one of the most destructive threats. The solution: a protected zone was established along each aqueduct, 15 feet in each direction. Everything was forbidden in this zone: building, plowing, planting. Patrols, circuitors, regularly inspected the route for violations. Problem 3. Water quality. Not all 11 aqueducts supplied the same quality of water. Some delivered pristine mountain water, others murkier river water. The Romans separated the flows: the best water for drinking and cooking, medium quality for bathhouses and fountains, the worst for flushing sewers. Before entering the city, settling basins, large pools where water slowed down and sediment settled to the bottom, were located. Not perfect. But for the first century, it was a revolution. And now, the man who systematized all this, Sextus Julius Frontinus. In 97 CE, he was appointed curator of Rome's aqueducts, the chief engineer of water supply. And here's what he did. He sat down and wrote the first historical technical audit of a city's water system. He measured the flow of each aqueduct. He inspected the condition of the channels. He drew maps. And he discovered water was being stolen on a massive scale. Farmers tapped into the channels. Merchants installed illegal pipes. Officials sold permits they had no right to sell. Half of the water grants went to senators, not because they needed the water, but because a private water supply was a status symbol. Frontinus compiled lists, shut down illegal connections, and hired inspectors. And he left behind a document that we read 2,000 years later. Because the problems are the same. Water theft is a problem for every major city in the world right now. And here's what's most captivating. One of Rome's aqueducts is still working today. Aqua Virgo, built in 19 BCE by order of Agrippa, Augustus's right-hand man. It was repaired and rebuilt in the 15th century, and again in the 17th. But the route is the same. The source is the same. The principle is the same. Gravity, gradient, stone. En-US. And it still supplies water to the Trevi Fountain, the very one where tourists toss coins. The water flowing from it follows a route established during Augustus's reign. But when the empire fell, the aqueducts died. Not because they broke, but because there was no one left to clean the buildup, patrol the routes, or repair the joints. The Goths cut off the channels, and Rome suffocated. The population plummeted from 1 million to 30,000. Medieval Europe returned to wells. For 1,000 years, people drank water worse than the Romans did. Systems of comparable sophistication only reappeared in the 19th century, 18 centuries later. Let that sink in. Aqueducts were built by engineers, but the money came from senators. And how Roman senators earned that money, through wars, provinces, and slaves, That's a whole other story. You might want to sit down for it.